This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the U.S. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
The mystery of flight MH370, namely its disappearance, has fascinated people for years. The theories on MH370 have run the gamut over the course of the last 10 years. There's been a major Netflix documentary about it, which reignited the whole discussion, the whole debate about this. I remember my Uncle Caesar even said that he thought they had made their way to an island or something. And by the way, my Uncle Caesar was an Air Force colonel. He was not an uninformed guy. And we're probably just hanging out there. That apparently turned out not to be the case. This is the trailer for the Netflix documentary that got a lot of people talking about this a year or two ago. Trailer to MH370.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have to turn on the fastest.
Planes go up, planes go down. What planes don't do is just vanish off the face of the earth.
We have breaking news. Malaysia Airlines confirms it has lost contact with a plane carrying 227 passengers.
It seems to have vanished into thin air.
What do we tell the family members? What do we tell the media?
My daughter asked me, "Where is Papa?" It's just so unimaginable.
I felt completely shattered. I lived in denial about the plane having some sort of crash.
Le monde s'arrête, quoi. Tout d'un coup, ils disent, mais c'est pas possible, c'est un cauchemar, réveillez-moi.
What happens next is like a rip in the fabric of reality.
Theories about the missing plane are going viral.
It's possible it was hijacked. We don't know.
This very mysterious and very suspicious cargo.
A pilot's home flight simulator was removed by police.
I have the real evidence. It's there, and you can't deny that.
Never in history have 239 people been declared dead on the basis of mathematics alone.
Some debris has been found.
Who planted there? Who brought the piece there?
Ils se foutent de nous. Ils se moquent de nous.
They are lying from the beginning. They are lying to the whole world.
MH370 is not just an unsolved mass murder. It's potentially an act of war.
How is it possible for an airline to disappear out of thin air?
Someone knows the answer. The question is who?
Good night, Malaysia 370.
That is the trailer to the Netflix documentary series, The Plane That Disappeared, all about the March 2014 disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. One of the people featured prominently in that documentary is Jeff Wise. It was the first time that I learned who Jeff Wise was. Turns out in a lot of quarters, he's very well respected, and his work on this has been very highly regarded. And it turns out in a lot of other quarters, the fact that he was included in that documentary made a lot of people take it not so seriously. I will tell you, though, I am very, very pleased to welcome back to the program a distinguished journalist and author, a guy that knows more about aviation and psychology than anybody, Jeff Wise. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me on the radio.
Hey, Frank. Thanks for having me.
At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. Jeff, you're doing something really interesting here, and I want to spend some time explaining this to folks and getting into it. But let's give a little background as to some of the theories and the controversies involving 370. In our previous conversation, you proposed the possibility that MH370 was hijacked through a cyber attack on the plane system. Given the skepticism from the aviation community, what evidence or examples of cyber vulnerabilities in aviation back up that theory? And how do you address your critics who might dismiss that as some sort of conspiracy theory?
Well, yeah, it's frustrating, honestly, because cyber vulnerabilities are a major concern these days. Hacking happens all across the economy. Every day you hear about some electrical grid that's hacked into, hospital system, airlines that are being hacked into. It happens all of the time. And to say, oh, airplanes, it's unrealistic to think that airplanes can't be hacked, I think that's like an ostrich with its head in the sand. Right now we're experiencing GPS hacking around the world, but especially in the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, the Middle East. Planes are actually being diverted from their course by a certain kind of GPS spoofing. So it seems to me naive, really, to think that, just to say out of hand, we think that Jeff's theory is, it's too unusual to us. We can't get our heads around it. It's frustrating because, I'm trying to say we have entered a new era where everything is dependent on computers. Everything is automated. Everything has a vulnerability. There's people out there, they call them advanced persistent threat actors. And these are people who are out to do evil, frankly, and they have the means and the capabilities at their disposal. That's the situation we're looking at.
Gotcha. In terms of the pilot suicide theory, this is something I've heard from a lot of people. Many experts, including at least at one point yourself, have suggested the murder-suicide theory by the captain is a possibility. Given the lack of concrete evidence, what makes people lean towards that theory? And do you think it's possible that focusing on the pilot may divert attention from other plausible explanations?
The case looks like pilot murder-suicide. That's if you just only have a glancing familiarity with the case, if you only know a few things about the case, it looks like pilot suicide. The plane gets diverted. Somebody has taken this plane. It happened right after, like about a minute after the captain said, "Good night, MH370." The plane goes electronically dark. It does a 180. Now, the airplane is controlled from the cockpit, right? And the person, whoever took it, is doing this so soon after saying on the radio "good night" that it's almost inconceivable that anyone else could have done it except for the captain, right? So it seems like a real no-brainer that the captain did it. However, this is why I said it's almost inconceivable, because actually the Australian Prime Minister, after he left office, did an interview with Australian 60 Minutes, and they asked him, like, okay, tell us the real truth about MH370. And he said that the Malaysians had told him very early on that they thought that the captain did it. Why? Because the captain was in the cockpit, and the cockpit is where you control an airplane from. It's done and dusted. Why is there even an argument? This is where people get mad at me, because they say, look, the facts that I just said are just plain as day. However, there is actually, and it's true, in most planes, the only place you can control the plane from is in the cockpit. However, the 777 is not exactly the same as every other plane. The 777 was Boeing's first fly-by-wire aircraft, meaning that in this particular plane, the whole thing was controlled from a banks of computers that were in a compartment called the EE bay, the electronics bay, that were accessible through an unlocked hatch in the business class cabin.
If people are just tuning in, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. My guest is Jeff Wise. We're talking about the disappearance and the mystery of flight MH370. Jeff, tell us what you're doing now. Your current project is pretty interesting. There was a big article in the Daily Mail about it, and it focuses a bit on the barnacle evidence. What exactly are you doing?
So the only physical evidence we have about what happened to MH370 are these pieces of debris that washed up in the western part of the Indian Ocean starting in 2015. And when these pieces started washing up, people thought, okay, look, this is finally proof that the pilot did take the plane, did crash it into the Southern Ocean, because now we have pieces. The first piece that washed ashore was a piece called the flaperon. It's a part of the right wing. And it washed ashore, It had little serial numbers on the inside that proved that it definitely came from this exact airplane. So again, it seemed like even more confirmation that there's only one possible explanation, that the plane went to the Southern Ocean under the control of the captain. Now, but when you look closely, now these pieces, the flaperon in particular, was covered in these creatures called barnacles, a particular kind of barnacle called Lepus antitifera. And these creatures live all throughout the ocean, and if anything goes in the water, they attach to it quickly and start to grow. And you've probably heard these like crime dramas about like if the police find a body in the field and they can tell how long it's been in the field by the bugs that grow on it. You've heard about that, right?
Sure.
It's the same kind of thing except with sea life. It's like the sea equivalent of that. Well, when they looked at these barnacles, come to find these barnacles are way too young. They're about a year too young. So it seems like these pieces went in the water about a year after the plane disappeared. There must be some logical explanation, surely. And so I have this. So I have started a project. I'm trying to fund it through Kickstarter. I would urge anyone who finds this interesting to go to Kickstarter and look for this Finding MH370 project, because we're actually going to buy a real 777 flaperon. There's a market for these things. It's not a huge market, but when they take apart a retired 777, they take all. It's like when you scrap a car, right? They take away the headlights and the whatever carburetor, whatever they got on the car these days, and you sell them. And these things cost usually about $45,000. I found one where a guy's going to sell me one for $24,000. So I'm trying to raise $50,000 on Kickstarter, because then I have to get it shipped to a guy in California who's going to cut it down to size and put in cameras, telemetry, satellite communications. And we're going to put this thing in the Indian Ocean near where the plane is thought to have vanished. And we're going to spend the next 15 months watching it float across the ocean and watching those barnacles grow. Because, Frank, this is the only physical evidence we have of what happened to this plane, and the evidence doesn't really make sense. So we're going to try to understand how these barnacles could have grown in the way that they did.
I mean, I got to give you credit for a creative approach to this. Why now? It's been over a decade since MH370 disappeared. We've seen two major unsuccessful searches. What has changed now that makes you believe your new approach could finally crack the mystery?
Well, I think it does have in part to do with the Netflix documentary, because a lot of people got very interested in that. I saw a real hunger. People really wanted to understand this case. And Frank, this is a very technically complicated case. There's a lot of science in it. Every single aspect needs unpacking and explanation. And so I started to do a podcast going through each part of it, like slicing an onion. And as I was talking about this stuff and people were interacting with me and I was answering people's questions, I realized, look, there is a real opportunity here to do something that could have been done but has never been done. There's a real tendency, if you have a theory, the problem with MH370 is that the pilot suicide theory is so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
It just looks so much like that people who really don't have a great appetite for this case will learn a few things, and then they'll hear all the evidence for pilot suicide, and they'll stop, and they'll think, okay, that must be it. And what they don't do is go a little further and start to hear the evidence which is contradictory, which is paradoxical. We can't explain how this evidence emerged, so we just say, to hell with it. The thing I keep hearing again is there must be a perfectly reasonable explanation for this. We don't know what it is. There must be and so what I'm trying to do is say, look, rather than just assume there's a perfectly reasonable explanation, let's really dig deep. One of the things that's so interesting about this case, and particularly the debris that was recovered in the Western Indian Ocean, is that the barnacles were found growing all over the flaperon. Now, Lepus barnacles only live underwater. As anybody who has a boat is very familiar. You have a boat, you keep it nice and clean, but under the waterline, all the gunk accumulates, right? And the same thing is true with Lepus. They live under the water. Well, if this flaperon was completely covered in barnacles, that implies that it floated, the whole thing was underwater. which things don't really float like that. If something's completely submerged, it usually sinks. But more to the point, when the authority, this was washed ashore on a French island called La Réunion, and the French authorities took it to mainland France, and they put it in a tank, and it floated about 1/3 out, right? So there's a water line on this thing. The barnacles would not normally be expected to live above the water line. So the whole reason for this escapade is that I want to put this thing in the ocean, and I want to watch it go across the ocean and see, do barnacles grow above the waterline? Because this is a paradox. It seems like a simple thing, but it seems to me a powerful paradox. And, most people don't like paradoxes. It's sort of confusing and disturbing, but scientists love paradoxes. It's when the data doesn't match our explanation that it means our models are faulty and we need to improve them.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This country was built on a distinctly American work ethic, but today, work is in trouble. We've outsourced most of our manufacturing to other countries, and with that, we sent away good jobs and diminished our capability to make things. American Giant is a clothing company that's pushing back against this tide. They make a variety of high-quality clothing and activewear, like sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more. All made right here in the USA, from growing the cotton and adding the final touches. So when you buy American Giant, you create jobs for seamsters, cutters, and factory workers in towns and cities across the United States. And it's about more than an income. Jobs bring pride, purpose. They stitch people together. If all that sounds good to you, visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com with promo code STAPLE20.
Now, we're talking with Jeff Wise. If you're interested in contributing to this Kickstarter campaign, I've just linked to it on my Facebook page. You can check it out at facebook.com/Morano fan. If you want to contribute even a few dollars, it could go a long way. Jeff, if your experiment is successful in locating the crash site, how optimistic are you about recovering the plane's data recorders? What do you expect those devices would reveal that hasn't already been pieced together from the fragments that we found?
There's two possible outcomes of this experiment, right? So either the piece floats across the ocean and the barnacles are, maybe because of the way it gets splashed or who knows, for whatever reason, the barnacles live all around the thing. That proves that indeed the Flopperon could have floated naturally on its own from a crash site in the southern Indian Ocean. And so that would imply that it is back in that area where they've searched. Now, I talk about how this case is so full of paradoxes. And one of the great paradoxes is that when this plane disappeared, it sent these electronic signals that no plane had ever sent before. And these signals tell the authorities a very specific location on the seabed where this plane should be, and yet it wasn't there. And that was really the beginning of my whole attempt to get to find an alternate explanation to pilot suicide. Because this is a question, this is a paradox. How is it that the plane is not in that area on the seabed? Anyway, that's outcome number one. Outcome number two is that after 15 months, we can see quite clearly that barnacles are not growing above the waterline. And what's more, they are not the right size, that actually barnacles in the real world grow much bigger than the ones that were found on the flat-bottom on La Réunion. That means that this piece could not have floated there naturally. This means that the piece must have been put there. It must have been put ashore, otherwise the barnacles would look different than they do. What does that mean? Well, who would have put it there? Well, clearly, as we said, there were serial numbers inside the flatbron that showed that it came from the actual plane. That means whoever took the plane put the parts. And that means it was hijacked by somebody else. The only way to hijack a plane that isn't from the cockpit is from the electronics bay. And so then that means that it was hijacked, and that means that it's not on the seabed. That's why they didn't find it.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. Investigating MH370 has obviously been a central part of your life for years. What keeps you so driven, despite the criticism, despite the dead ends? Do you feel any personal responsibility to find answers for the families of the victims?
Yeah, and it's not just the families of the victims, it's all of us. See, well, my worry was when I realized back in June of 2014 that there was a cyber vulnerability that might have been exploited. I didn't have any evidence at the time that it was exploited, but there were two implications, Frank, of that idea. The first was that, as I said, the plane would not be found on the seabed of the Southern Ocean, as indeed it wasn't. But the second one was that somebody was out there who was extremely sophisticated, extremely ruthless, and had carried out a crime that not only hadn't been detected, but when I suggested the nature of this crime, like people could not get their heads around it. Like people are incapable of even considering that this was a cyber attack, and think how vulnerable that. The implication is that we are absolutely 100%. We're like dodos on Mauritius, who, when the sailors come ashore with their clubs, the birds are like they are unable to imagine that they're about to get clubbed over the head.
Yeah, well, I'll say that's one way of putting it. What about the public fascination here? You alluded to this a minute ago. MH370 has become one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time, right up there with Amelia Earhart. It's captivated the attention of millions of people worldwide. What is it about this tragedy that you think makes it so enduringly fascinating to people? Do you ever worry that the public's interest in this or the intrigue could overshadow the real human loss that's involved here?
I think the reverse, actually. I think, like I would emphasize it. This isn't just the people whose relatives and loved ones were on the plane who suffered. We all suffered because we all live in a world in which planes can disappear without explanation. I mean, before 2014, planes didn't. I mean, you had Amelia Earhart, right? But that was so long before. We had Air France 447. If you remember that, that was in 2009.
Right. I was just going to ask you about that. Right.
Yeah, the plane had disappeared en route to Paris. Right, and they found some electronic signals. In many ways, it had some real similarities to MH370, but they found it. They understood the cause. There was nothing deeply weird about that case. This one, it almost seems engineered to be fascinating. If you remember back at the time, there were all these pennies that kept dropping, and it was almost like if you're watching a cliffhanger, from the old movie days where you'd pay 5 cents and go see, 2 movies or something. Back in the 30s, right? There was all these cliffhangers and twists and turns, and it almost seems like it was engineered to keep people fascinated and paying attention to it. Well, maybe things were happening elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I wish we had a longer amount of time to talk, but before I let you go, I do have to ask you about some of the unusual actors involved here. In your book, The Taking of MH370, you suggested unusual geopolitical actors could be involved. What role do you think geopolitics or state actors might have played in the plane's disappearance, and how do you support that idea?
Well, I mentioned earlier that if this plane was cyber attacked, it implies an advanced persistent threat actor out there carrying it out. And my fear was that, well, if this is the case, we are vulnerable and bad things could happen. And indeed, bad things did happen. A lot of bad things did happen. It turned out that we were in a kind of invisible war where Russia, with their cyber attacks and assassinations and misinformation campaigns, hacking, they've been involved. They're basically at war with us using these kind of gray zone or hybrid warfare techniques to do as much harm to us as they can without triggering outright war. And as you know, there were just indictments a week or two ago where they were trying to tamper in our current U.S. election. And so I just wish that people would sort of wake up and say, okay, regardless of what actually happened to MH370, the fear that this was a symbol or a symptom of someone attacking us, we need to. It's amazing to me, Frank, that people really act as if we're not at war with somebody, that somebody isn't actively trying to cause us harm all the time around the world.
Jeff, we're going to end it there. I appreciate the time. And again, I want to urge everybody that's interested in helping in your efforts with the Kickstarter campaign that they can absolutely go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/Morano fan, and make their contribution and help make this a reality. What's the timeline for this, do you think, Jeff?
We've got another 3 weeks running on the Kickstarter, and as you say, if a lot of people could just kick in a little bit of money to help this happen, it would be really interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what it's going to turn out to be, but I would love to just wake up every morning and watch the dot moving across the map and see where's this thing going and how are these barnacles growing. And it'll be like one of those Polaroid pictures that, you shake and then eventually you see the picture will emerge. I would love to do that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Thank you, Jeff Wise. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Frank.
If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, feel free to do so. 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.